everybody, and thank you for joining today's webinar from Secureworks on extending security across IT and OT. My name is Bud Ellis with the product marketing team here at Secureworks. Thanks for joining us. Let's get started. Before we begin, let me just run through a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded and all participants are entered in listen-only mode. Please see the widgets at the bottom of your screen for ways to interact with us during the webinar. Here, you will be able to access various resources related to today's conversation. You'll find the Q&A function near the slide area. Please submit your questions to us as we go through the webinar, and we will address questions at the end of our talk today. Now, should you experience any technical difficulties, please click the Help widget on your screen to get support. And then one final thing I want to mention. There is a Take Survey widget. We're really interested in your feedback about the webinar, so share your thoughts with us. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. So as I said, my name is Bud Ellis. I'm a product marketing senior advisor here at Secureworks. I've been here almost 14 years, and the last 6.5 with the product marketing organization. Now let me introduce and turn it over to the two people you really want to hear from today, not me, but our experts. Julian, hello, my friend. How about coming on and introducing yourself?
Good day, Bud. Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. So as Bud mentioned, I am Julian Garcia. I've been with the company for about 6.5 years. I've been in the industry basically right out of college, or I started during college. I do have a mechanical engineering degree and a minor in aerospace engineering. But since college, I've been very focused on IT. Took on my first OT job in the early 90s. Focused a lot on OT and IT and the challenges of both different worlds, so both continents, where I help converge or connect those two different continents at the New York Daily News. From there, I focused on the different industries, specifically manufacturing, and most recently, I was with Kaspersky and closing, of course, these last wonderful 6.5 years with Secureworks. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Julian. Marcel, hello, my friend. Would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Bud. Marcel Bornhoefft, Senior Systems Engineer with Secureworks. I'm based out of Germany. And I'm working for Secureworks since the beginning of last year. And with my 17 years of experience in the IT security space, like OT is like following me around like all the time. When I came out of university, I started at Siemens, deep technically as a penetration tester. Did there my technical duty till I moved a little bit more to the IT, OT security management side for railway turnkey systems in the Siemens mobility department. And after I helped there securing IT and OT systems, I actually went helping customers with clarity to securing especially OT systems from cybersecurity threats in the OT domain. And now I'm pleased to do that for Secureworks.
All right. Thank you, Marcel. Thank you, Julian. So today we're going to talk about the ongoing convergence of IT and OT that is unfolding. It's a conversation that many organizations are having. Perhaps you're having those conversations as well. We're going to take a look at the challenges that convergence has, how you can secure both the corporate and the operational sides of the house. And then we're going to talk about and explore what an integrated approach to security looks like. And then finally, at the very end, we're going to briefly introduce a solution that we launched back at the end of May, Taegis Managed XDR for OT. So let's go ahead and jump in. And with that, I will turn it over to Julian to really get us started. Take it away, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Bud. In the early 90s, when I started working for the New York Daily News, I came in as an engineer. And my focus was really to be able to look at the entire infrastructure. And one of the things that I quickly learned was that there was a separate team that was handling the plant network. what I realized is that they had their own budget. In addition to that, they were deploying their own switches, their own firewalls. And as a result of that, I realized that I had two different networks to be responsible for. So while they had their own budget, they were deploying their own equipment, I was actually responsible for the security of both networks. So what did I have to do? So number one, I needed to better understand the different personas, identify the challenges there, identify common areas, right? Our focus is to be able to deliver a specific business. But that was over 10 years ago. And while it continued to be a challenge, what's driving the convergence today is most certainly the business, the OT vendors, and of course, as much as we have to admit, the fact that the adversary is driving this convergence. It's incredibly important for IT and OT to converge. I think both worlds, both personas, technologies, and as a result of that, this is kind of what we want to talk about. This is kind of what we want to deliver our experiences. This is how both Marcel and I, based on our different experiences, we're going to have a conversation and enable you also to interact with us. So questions will be open. There'll be some polling questions. And as a result of that, we're going to make this as much fun and interactive and education as much as possible for you.
Yeah, and with this convergent in mind, it's also striking that the numbers are hinting that organizations, like 70% of the organizations, are planning to converge their security functions across the enterprises for the OT and the IT space. And also that's actually my experience when I left Siemens. I mean, they also worked on exactly that, that they reassessed the org structure, that they brought the CISO and the operational actually under a converged function so that they are pulling on the same string. Because the challenges and the threats, but also the advancements only can really be realized when those functions are working together. And when we're actually talking about the benefits, Julian, do you want to talk a little bit about what we can actually achieve when we are going hand in hand in an IT-OT converged manner and face the challenges that we might talk later about? But let's first concentrate on the benefits.
Yeah, these benefits are certainly being driven in many different ways, right? What's driving out IT and OT convergence touches up on a lot of different factors. With respect to, let's say, keeping the production lines running, right? We'll start with that. But actually, let me back up a minute, because one of the things that helped me a lot in relating to the convergence is that it's important for us to be able to take a step back and to be able to listen, to learn, and of course, to relate. Because I think when we do that, we find a common ground, right? The business, of course, has its own objectives. The individuals in the production of plant network have their own objectives. The folks in the corporate or enterprise network have their own objectives. But at the end of the day, everyone can most certainly say that they share these things in common, right? So of course, keeping production lines running. At the New York Daily News, we had specific deadlines, and we needed to have our presses up and running. We needed to have our robots working well. We needed to have our sensors certainly reporting the right data. And as a result of that, we met deadlines, and we had the newspaper out at the different stores on time, the different editions on time. And it was important. So, to have that story out first, and most certainly, of course, to be able to deliver the newspaper even across the United States. In addition to that, and I think equally important, I worked a lot with the facility individuals. It was about keeping those individuals safe, keeping the facilities clean, doing a lot of testing before production, right? So some of these things are being driven and expanding into IT. And in addition to that, IT models are expanding into OT. So that convergence is certainly happening. And it's something that's a priority, right? Employee and facility safety. And in addition to that is the financial efficiencies. when both organizations are learning from each other. Just take the IT corporate and enterprise IT engineer to the OT production engineer. If both individuals can understand each other, they're going to work more efficiently. And as a result of that, that's going to be a direct relation to financial efficiencies. Furthermore, satisfying compliance and regulations. There's been an increase in those different types. And if you're a publicly traded company, recently it was announced that an organization must disclose a cybersecurity incident within 4 days, right? To have material impact. Now, that is often up to interpretation, but satisfying compliance and regulations continues to be something that is slowly creeping in, and we have to be cognizant of that. Of course, technology vendors in the IT world, and then there's technology vendors in the OT world, are innovating from smart cities to different types of sensors, robots, and most recently, AI is becoming such a big technology push that we have to foster innovation. And ultimately, this is going to lead, of course, to more production. And of course, the increase of production outputs, right? The more efficient that we are with respect to everything that we talked about so far, we have to be advocates and champions of that convergence. And as a result in doing that, we can collaborate, right? So it's an acceleration of collaboration that we need to accept, right? And as a result of that, what does that mean? We have to improve visibility. Having visibility, not just from a technology perspective, but having visibility to understanding the business. The OT folks are going to respect the IT folks a lot more when we understand each other's business, when we understand each other's roles. So most certainly, there's a lot of different factors that are driving this, which leads us to our next our first poll question. So one of the things that I've noticed is that from my experience, about 60% of organizations today do not have an OT monitoring solution. They're relying on some sort of a SIM solution or a SIM alternative to be able to collect data from these OT plant production networks. So our first question today is, what third-party OT monitoring solution do you currently have or are planning to implement? Now, as you can see here, from the list of answers, you have Clarity, Dragos, and Scatterthings. Those three companies happen to be organizations that we have partnered with, that we can integrate with. Of course, there are many others, and Secureworks being a vendor-agnostic organization, of course, we're focusing on doing that with other vendors as well. So we're going to pause here for 20 to 30 seconds, give you an opportunity to answer these questions. And then Bud will advance to the results.
That will be definitely an interesting one for me.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
It's definitely showing where the mind is going from our potential customers here, and from our existing customers as well. So like where are they setting their goals? Are they actually having it on the radar at all?
Yeah, I'm very curious. Definitely. I think it's important to see that. I think we need to welcome these changes, since most certainly as a result of that, be open-minded.
All right, I think we've given enough time for some folks to answer. Let's go to the next slide and see what we have.
Yeah, look.
Interesting.
None at this time. I said 60%, and I was right on. Look at that.
That is spot on. You could not have nailed that. So those of you who voted other, feel free to pop in the chat if you wish what solution you have. And I will turn it back over to Marcel and Julian.
Yeah, great. With that, let's talk a little bit about the dark side of the IT and OT convergence. I mean, we talked about the benefits, but to reaping those benefits, we first have to overcome the obstacles that might be in the way. And with getting this understanding, getting all this data out of the OT landscape into the IT landscape, and I think that's what we need in the end to actually foster the understanding. Everything is based today on data, more or less. We have to build connections up, and these connections come with certain threats and vulnerabilities. So, Julian, you prepared a little bit here, something nice so that we can visualize like which kind of threats and challenges are we actually have to expect.
Yeah, most certainly. So a couple of disclaimers. First disclaimer is that, you know, what we're going to talk about here, these are not exclusive. I mean, these are most certainly not the only threats or methodologies that the adversary will take to compromise an environment, right? They can go from top down and, of course, from down up onto the top, right? What we're looking at here is the Purdue model, and I suspect that most of you are familiar with the Purdue model. Basically, it boils down to several different things, three things: data flow, classification, and segmentation, right? So we're going to take a closer look here. As you can see, we have different models. You have the assume OT monitoring solution. As we noted earlier with respect to the polling question, 60% of you don't have this, right? Some sort of an OT monitoring solution, but you're doing some sort of monitoring. Now, of course, we're cognizant that we have to be careful on what agents get installed on what specific machines in the lower levels, right? With respect to, let's say, even level 3, level 2, and level 1, if there are any engineering workstations at that level. But most certainly, there are different areas that we need to be concerned about. And they look like this. So I'm not going to go through every single one area here. And as I mentioned earlier, these are not exclusive. These are not the only threats that the adversary looks into compromising any specific environment. But I'm going to pick the top left two on the lot, top left, which is an insecure internet connection, or oftentimes a rogue access point, right? We have to be cognizant of that. So I always remember my experience back at the Daily News with respect to change control management. That's number one. And of course, making sure that every single Ethernet switch is disabled, right? No one should be able to connect to a specific port without some sort of a change control. So by default, you do a default denied at layer 2, right? With respect to layer 1, anything that has that needs a physical connection should go through a change control process. So an insecure internet connection can easily happen if anyone can just plug in on any given port, get an IP address, and suddenly they have access to the internet. How about poor device controls? So many times we hear about this, right? It's something that I think that Marcel had some thoughts about, and I always like hearing about this. There's two specific books. One specific book, actually, that I happen to really love. There was a documentary made out of this specific story. And Marcel will talk a little bit about that. But I will tell you one that is not on this list, and that is us, the human factor, with respect to either the security awareness or the simple fact that there's not enough communication. So we have to be thinking about that, right? We need to have some sort of a security-centric culture between both IT and OT. Marcel, what are your thoughts on the rest of this? I mean, there are just so many, right? And certainly not exclusive.
I would pick two. I would actually start with with a little bit with the internal threat, probably also what you're hinting at, like at an ex-Siemensianer. I'm also like a little bit burned with the whole Stuxnet story, and this really nails down the whole thing. Like sometimes the threat is not coming where we are expecting it, on the path that are well tread. Like just an USB stick infected somewhere else where we never had connected it internally with the security controls with the OT, and then the thing is coming from the IT over to the some USB stick, and then it's brought in physically. But it is also really nails down why this OT monitoring is so important, because we never know when a threat is inside of the OT already. Even if we have air-gapped systems, we cannot rely on that anymore. But even though we cannot rely on air-gap anymore, the other thing is because we need more and more data to, again, foster this understanding between IT and OT, we have more interconnections. And when I'm looking at this list here, I'm also seeing there are a lot of things that IT security experts know for a long time and are well understood and are well IT security challenges. And And I think the really, really important thing to nail down is also, if you want to protect your OT, you have to protect your IT well as well, because this is one of the main entry factors. And I think we have also here a nice visualization for that, correct, Julian?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, ultimately the adversary, if they're coming in through your IT environment, right, you're going to practice and utilize everything that you have today, right? From, let's say, privilege session and access management, multi-factor authentication, identity and access management, asset management. These are areas that we need to be cognizant of. But if there's an area that can be exploited, the adversary is going to quickly go in, and if his objective is to be able to infect the instructions with respect to a specific PLC, which is driving perhaps a specific motor or different types of heat exchanger or pump or anything like that, certainly they can do a lot of damage. We talked about Wi-Fi, an insecure Wi-Fi network, right? This happens quite often. Our Secureworks adversary group, actually, we're exceptionally good at doing some pen testing. So be cognizant of this, right? Put your wireless environments to some rigorous testing to be able to identify gaps within your wireless network, because oftentimes we go in and we identify that there's a very insecure network. Our wireless pen testers are some of the best in the world. We actually, DEF CON just completed. We actually had an opportunity, or we were very, I'll say with a lot of hard work and the right individuals, we competed and won 3 years in a row, the wireless capture the flag competition at DEF CON, and when we are actually no longer allowed to compete. So we're part of now the DEF CON village, which as a result of that enables us to become judges in some of these competitions and even create them, right? So it's very important to keep your wireless network secure. In addition to that, we also have another type kind of adversary approach that's important to call out. So the very next one you'll see, what we have here is the historian. And I'll tell you, compromising a historian from my experience, I'd say it has to be one of the most essential assets in your OT network from my perspective. Its effectiveness in understanding OT security events is incredibly important. It's incredibly useful, right, to be able to help us scope a particular incident. But if the adversary compromises this machine, it's also possible that this machine has access to other aspects and other levels within that network, right? Within maybe access to level 2. And then from there, they can use the historian as a jump box. What does this all lead to? It leads to something bad, right? And I would say the number one, no one can argue with this, without when an adversary is successful at compromising the OT environment and they get to level 1 and level 0, we have a very serious problem, right? And sometimes it will lead most certainly to disruption. It could also lead to supply chain disruption, which is like most certainly one of the worst things. But the worst is certainly casualties, injuries, right? This is something that needs to be taken serious.
Exactly, Julian. What can you take to the next slide? And when we're talking about those impacts, like manufacturing clients, which are actually a huge part of our existing customer base, they are facing some unique challenges there. And as we see there, the threat landscape is complex. I mean, the IT security threat landscape is complex. And now we are kind of like opening up a completely new can of worms with the OT environment, where the same principles apply, but we have to look at it with the lens of the OT security needs and principles that are going there. But we also have to face the fact that there are kind of like two main threats existing. The one is we could be affected by breaches and like infections spreading from the IT. If there's like ransomware spreading, which can, if we are not secured properly, it can take our plans down. But it's also true that focused, targeted OT attacks exist now. I mean, I talked about Stuxnet. There exists Triton in Destroyer. we really had the situation that highly skilled attackers are now able to understand OT environments and target them. And because of that, we need like this holistic understanding so that we or our client base is not affected about that. Because in the end, what's coming down to is the availability of our production line. And every minute, every hour costs us really money and time that we could use to make the bottom line in the end. And I'm not even talking about, as you said, like safety aspects here. It's just makes sense from a business standpoint to protect our assets. But that's not really that easy, because if you know, IT security talent is scarce on the talent market. IT OT security talent is kind of like finding the unicorn. It's really, really scarce. And then you, on top of that, you have to build the processes, you have to build an IT-OT converged SOC, which is also not an easy task. And I applaud every company that's successfully doing and implementing such programs. But again, it's not easy. And that's exactly where I think sometimes help is needed. And regarding the help, we come to the help part a little bit later. Now we actually want to talk again a little bit like how would like an integrated approach actually would look like. How would we imagine this hand-in-hand work like IT and OT in joint synergy, how we imagine that. Julian, can you run us through a little bit like how we envision like this IT-OT converged world?
Yeah. So what we take in here is the smart asset control loop, specifically from Gartner, right? It's focused around IoT, it's focused around OT, but really when you look at it, you take a step back, it really is a perfect model that enables the IT and OT convergence, right? From enterprise corporate network to your production network. You know, we always start with the sense making, right? I always like to say, and I'll probably will say this again, right? Prevent where you can and detect what can be prevented, right? So it's important to be able to do the sense making, to do the sense making first, right? This is assuming that you have all the right controls, everything's talking to each other. And as a result of that, we're going to be able to detect IT and OT events, right? This is the first stage of that OT device sensing, right? Where it senses a particular issue and allows us to collect relevant data. Equally as important, what do we do with this data? So this data needs to be communicated, right? It needs to be communicated from the field to the OT systems, right? The OT monitoring solutions, and perhaps even the IT monitoring solution. And as a result, again, it's kind of working towards that convergence. When a lot of these different aspects are actually working, the next thing that's important is to be able to analyze, right? To be able to take that data. Here's the data that needs to be analyzed. And these are the conclusions that we will be drawing as a result of what we have seen or made sense of, right? And as a result of that, we're able to confirm specific threats, right? And then be able to determine some sort of a response. And by the time we get into the act, right, this is kind of where, depending on location, depending on responsibility, whether it's in the field or remote, right? A specific individual, whether it be a security analyst, a threat hunter, these are the individuals that we have within our team, or an incident responder, right? Or an engineer within your organization. They'll be able to carry out specific required actions, right? Whether it be specific to an asset, specific to a segment, or specific to their level, right? Within the Purdue model, right? We talked earlier about that importance of kind of the data flow aspect, the classification, and the segmentation. And then, of course, it's a loop, right? We repeat once again. So you need an organization that understands this, the asset control, the smart asset control loop. You need an organization that has the experience with respect to incident response, converging the two, performing digital forensic gathering, right? Being able to continuously provide visibility from a security monitoring perspective, right? And it's no longer just about the endpoint or the network. It's also about what these OT assets in that world and whatever we're identifying comes into play, whether it's acceleration, whether it's vibration, whether it's leaks or different liquid fluid levels, whether it's specific issues related to chemical, humidity. I mean, there's so many aspects, right? We haven't even talked about smart cities, all of these different aspects, and medical IoT devices. We understand this smart asset control loop, and as a result of that, we can respond collectively to your environments.
I think it's so important that we have to go this jointly, because imagine IT and OT would do that like in parallel. I mean, you could still have like your loop, but you would like create like endless blind spots. I think that's a really important part. By going through this loop together, this is really where you like dissolve those blind spots, you dissolve those silos, and you really can then like hand in hand like act upon the threats that might start in the IT, but can have like big influences on the OT and again on the uptime. And I think that's really, really critical here.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think this kind of leads us to, you know, kind of our product, right? Our solution relative to really looking at this holistically. What do you think, Bud?
Yeah, absolutely, guys. So we have a solution that we launched a couple months ago that addresses the items that Julian and Marcel have talked about so far today, and that is our Secureworks Taegis Managed XDR for OT solution. It's the first integrated MDR solution for OT and IT, a holistic managed detection and response solution that's based on the Secureworks Taegis platform to protect organizations against cyber attacks on both the IT and the OT side of the house. We help organizations safeguard against operational disruption, deploy security expertise without having to go out and find and hire and train and retain that staff that is, as Marcel said, is really difficult to find right now. Being able to boost an organization's overall cyber resiliency and being able to have an answer for both IT and OT from one vendor with one solution. And again, helping that convergence flow. All right, guys, back to you.
Absolutely. So we clearly, there's a lot to be responsible for, a lot to be aware of, right? We also need to accept the fact that the adversary just needs to get it right once, right? We need to get it right all the time. And as a result of that, we need to be cognizant and aware of all of these different aspects, all of these moving pieces. You know, I mentioned earlier, you know, prevent where you can and detect what can't be prevented. And as a result of that, combining these two different continents, right, and using Taegis Managed XDR for OT, and of course, most of you have Taegis Managed XDR now, right? This is kind of enable you to kind of have that visibility, right? At least 60% of you, you're going to gain that level of visibility that's important. As a matter of fact, our researchers have compiled some data, and based on the last couple of years, it was identified that ransomware, right? And I don't believe in kind of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt factor, but the facts are that manufacturing leads the leads in different industry verticals relative to ransomware-based incident response engagements. You know, further, in addition to that, what we've also learned that it was due to a high lack of digital convergence, right? Being able to recognize the fact that it's important to have that same level of strong IT security hygiene to that to, of course, be also within OT. And then, of course, for both organizations to kind of, or both departments between OT and IT to talk together. So what we're looking at here, it's all of these different aspects are delivering some sort of an event, and that event is eventually leading to that OT monitoring solution. And then, of course, eventually leading to what we're looking at here, the Taegis XDR collector. If we go to the next slide for a second, just click once. And here what we see, right? You have the OT monitoring console solution, collecting the data that is relevant to OT. And then, of course, that data being fed into Taegis, into a single UI platform that enables our OT security specialists to be able to identify, and then in the event that they need to validate, they will also utilize your OT monitoring solution. And as a result of that, you're going to have an incident response or an incident responder that now has that capability to be able to see both solutions, but at the same time using one solution from a security incident response perspective.
And I really want to emphasize, like, this is one of the challenges that came up when I worked beforehand for one of those OT monitoring vendors. Like a lot of times I got the question, okay, we are now monitoring our OT. What is coming next? Like how do we integrate that in our IT security process? And this is what the great thing about this offering here that I want to stress. Like this is the link, the missing link between IT and OT, because now we have like 24/7 monitoring of events from IT security experts and also OT-focused experts, which also have the IT security context, which means if something is happening in your environment which has OT impact, someone is looking at it, can understand it, because that's oftentimes what the IT security teams in a lot of companies is missing, this OT understanding, and can therefore escalate it to the persons that need the information the most so they can react on it quickly and effectively. And that with really integrating with the main vendors on the market, which we also represented in the poll, so that you get the visibility in your OT environment and you can really leverage those solutions from a central place, which we talked about like in the smart asset loop. You need to centralize this data, and we are providing with our Taegis Cloud this platform to actually have this centralized view on the matter. Anything that you want to stress here, Julian?
You know, I think I think it's important to remind everyone, right? You know, with respect to that level of visibility, 41% of the adversary successful compromise breaches is still. They're still coming in as a result of vulnerability in devices, right? 41%. So that visibility into the different assets, right? So we're talking about asset management and identification, right? Being able to have some level of control with respect to remote access, right? Being able to identify malicious insiders, right? This goes back to kind of just common things, right? But more certainly internet exposed assets, physical security, and the fact that we have this, you know, this holistic solution that's vendor agnostic, that's supporting 3 OT major vendors today, right? Clarity, SCADAfence, and Dragos. I mean, and the fact that we're working on other organizations, our focus really is to be able to adapt to what you have. Right. So I encourage you to just work with your account managers. We'll be able to help you not only proactively relative to, let's say you're missing you don't have a cybersecurity incident response plan. We can help you develop that. So that brings us actually to the next poll question. So is OT included in your response, in your incident response plan? And it's important to keep that in mind because incident management and incident response are 2 different things. We will help you assess that. We will help you evaluate that. We will help you create one. Perhaps we can look at your existing IT incident response plan, right? Because it's not going to be an entirely cookie cutter. It's not a copy and paste. So you need an organization that's mature, that's familiar with the OT world, that can relate with you. So I'm very curious about if you have an actual OT incident response plan with this question.
And what I really find interesting about this plan, or if this plan actually is existing, IT and OT bring both at one table and making them talk to each other. I think that alone is a really, really important key goal for any successful IT/OT security program. And therefore, if you have really like an incident response plan where OT is involved, I think you already did a great milestone there. And this is also something that we can help you with.
Exactly. Let's go ahead and let's check the poll results, guys. So there we go. So
That's
roughly 2 out of 3 say OT is included. That is good. That is good, because to Marcel and Julian's point, at the end of the day, it's about securing your environment, whether or not it's IT or OT. And we do know that there's different flavors and nuances, of course, between the two. But at the end of the day, if something is discovered, you obviously have to do something about it, right? Okay, guys, back to you.
Yeah, this is really great. Thank you. Thank you. I want to go back just to that one. Can we go back to that poll? If not, I can talk about it real quick, the poll answer. The reason why I say that it's not only the fact that you have the response plan. I'm really happy to hear this. But in addition to that, I mean, for the folks that don't have one, we can work with you, right? For the folks that have one, you got to test these response plans, create test scenarios. I remember working for an organization, we had different types of tests. We had a biohazard test. We had a terrorist attack test, right? We had a particular site down test. So test your incident response plans as well. So what are the outcomes? I mean, for me, the most important one, and I think it should be for all of us, embrace, the fact that these two different worlds need to work together. Find your champion, find your advocate, listen and learn from each other. And as a result of that, you're going to be able to relate, right? This is, of course, going to enable you to bolster your overall cybersecurity. I call it a security-centric culture. Deployed security expert without hiring resources. I mean, that's difficult. It's a challenge we all have, whether it's IT, OT. And I think for that, I think it's just a matter of just identifying the different areas where you can support the different business objectives. And of course, protect against operational disruption. For me, it's just about practicing deliberate security, right? Identify your controls, use the controls for the specific design area, right? Protect the different assets relative to where they are within the Purdue model that allows you to do proper classification. And as a result of that, follow that same idea of what we talked about earlier, right? Privileged session or access management.
Yeah, and maybe one thing that I want to add, this offering really helps you in the end to concentrate on the things that you want to do. You want to run your business either on the IT and the OT side, and we can help you to tackle the IT OT security part. Because we know it's a busy world, everyone is stretched, and to help you with that and bring us in to concentrate on these IT OT threats helps you to have this one thing handled so that you can concentrate on the other risks that are maybe like more and more on your daily business.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's these day-to-day stuff. Like, right, we need to be cognizant, and you need a solution that's going to be able to take your operator logs. We need a solution that's going to be able to take, the different controls that take place relative to an engineering workstation, the different activity there, right? So Windows event logs, if they're using Windows. You need a solution that supports older operating systems. You need a solution that will be able to collect application logs, sysmon logs, authentication logs, registry activity, right? And more certainly NetFlow activity relative to network, those firewall logs. And as I mentioned earlier, incredibly important, just constant network security monitoring. We will be able to do that for you. So when you have these two different technologies, an OT monitoring solution combined with a solution like Taegis, you're going to have a true holistic approach relative to what we're seeing, relative to visibility, and then, of course, responding to certain activity much, much faster than anyone else.
Well said, guys. Well said. So as we go to close out here, I want to thank Julian and Marcel for their tremendous insight, for sharing their vast experience and perspectives with us, gleaned from years and years of living this every day, right? So If you're interested in learning more about Taegis Managed XDR for OT, then we invite you to contact your CSM or your account executive, or just pop us a note down in the Q&A and let us know. And as a reminder, those widgets I talked about at the start of the webinar, you can find additional information about the solution in the related content section. So speaking of Q&A, let's get to the questions, and we appreciate we've got a few questions that have come in. So Marcel and Julian, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to play moderator. I'm going to read the question. One or both of you can jump in with your perspective. Let's go ahead and get started. I won't go back to my old school radio days and name the caller of the city, but I'll just read the question. So we have a question that's come in. Is the OT XDR a solution that you implement instead of other vendors like a Clarity? Or is your solution something that we would have in addition to an OT solution?
I mean, the short answer, it's in addition, right? What it's going to do is going to complement your existing technology. I'll be curious to know, you mentioned, I think it was Clarity as part of the question. I would love to know more what not only what technologies, but perhaps other services connected to that, right? Perhaps did you sign up for incident response services with Clarity or anything like that? So it's in addition. It will certainly complement the Clarity technology and its events and what we do with its events, whether it be specific to protocols within your OT environment or specific to PLC logic, or be specific to something more IT specific that we're more familiar with, like, malware and things like that.
Yeah, maybe one addition to that is, in the end, it's really, the great thing is it's building the bridge between those solutions, because in the end, for us, like a Clarity, a Dragos Scala fence is another telemetry source, like exactly like a next generation firewall or like an endpoint EDR. But we get the telemetry in. But the other great thing is that we now also can support you from the SOC with this OT expertise. So it's, on the one hand, it's a telemetry source, but we have people that can understand the telemetry. So that's really the important part.
Right. Okay. Great answers, guys. Another question that has come in specific to the solution. Do you need an additional collector if you have one from one of those existing providers?
Okay. So those existing providers will have a network analysis appliance. That's basically what it is, right? And that collector, of course, is OT specific with OT proprietary solutions relative to whether it be SCADA, Clarity, or Dragos, or some of the others that we haven't mentioned. So you will need one. You will need another one. So we you're calling it collector. That's fine, right? Because we call it a data collector. We will eventually kind of collect that data. It was one of the earlier slides where we had the diagram. So I'm not sure, Bud, if you can go back, I think it'll be helpful. Just maybe 3 or 4 slides. I don't know if that's possible. And I think it kind of shows the picture here. Yeah, and just play the clear this one out. Yep, one more. Play it out through. And one more. Click. Perfect.
There we go.
So as you can see, you have that OT monitoring console. It's going to have its own collector. It can also act as its own collector. So you don't need another one. But of course, essentially, all that data is effectively making it to the Taegis XDR collector.
Okay. Well said. Great question. Another question that I have here is, from your perspective, and I'm interested to hear the perspective of both of you, given your expertise. What is, or what are 1 or 2 critical areas in OT that organizations maybe often overlook from a security perspective?
Okay. I'm going to say probably there's so many, right? But oftentimes you got to go back to basics, and it's about identifying and the importance of business continuity, and that's a big one, right? And and I think it's second to that, backups and testing those backups. Sometimes the same rules apply. And in this particular case, it's no different in the OT world. So those are my two.
Yeah, I would say like remote access and supply chain, which are for me are really highly or tightly coupled, because oftentimes like you need your maintenance people from your OEMs to run your environments. So they are part of your supply chain, but actually to supply their services, they oftentimes have to get into your network. And therefore, this is another example where I would say, like, if you tell me, okay, your systems are air-gapped, this would be one of my challenging questions, like, how does your OEM connect to your network? And then suddenly you realize, maybe my air gap is not that tight as I actually thought it is. And this, again, they do that for a reason, for a good reason as well, but this introduces new risks, because you don't know which security controls are on the other side of those networks. And therefore, if you don't have your own remote access solution in place, you kind of like rolling with whatever they implemented there. And if you then have no detection on your side, you're blind. So I think that's one of really, really important things, like what is actually getting in from those networks that you actually have no control over.
It's a great perspective. Really good question that's come in, and I'm fascinated by this one, so really interested to hear both of your takes on this. We're just considering, just beginning our OT journey, just beginning to consider what do we do about OT. What's maybe one or two things that you recommend that we should be thinking about and we should be talking about internally?
I guess I go first as well here. It's asset identification and data classification, right? You can't protect what you don't know. So for me, I think those are essential.
For me, it's really like, who is responsible for what? Because especially if you have a challenge in the OT in regards of cybersecurity, who's actually responsible for it? Because that's something that I saw a lot of times. It's like, okay, we have vulnerabilities, like who is fixing those vulnerabilities? Who is responsible for those? Or there is an incident, like who do I call? I mean, those incident response plans, sometimes the most important part is just to know, like, who do I call next? This has to be crystal clear, because if the panic rises and everyone is like headless chicken, you normally don't have the time to realize or make those plans again.
Right, that makes sense. Great answer. And as I look back through the queue, it looks like that's it for our questions. So on behalf of both Julian and Marcel and everybody here at Secureworks, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We hope you found it informative and somewhat entertaining as well. And most of all, thank you guys who are Secureworks customers for being customers. We greatly appreciate it. For Julian, for Marcel, I'm Bud. Thanks for attending. Have a great day. So long, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.